Greetings all, BWS2K here. I finally got around to watching the second part of Masters of the Universe Revelation. So I wanted to make another video following up on some of the things that I said in the first video. I do have a script again, which I will try to stick to. But before we even talk about the show, I need to briefly share a bit about why I think that I connected to and why I cared so much for Revelation. I was born in the 80s, in the early 80s, and my brother and I had several He-Man figures, and we had vehicles, and we had play sets, the whole 9 yards. And I came home from school on the bus one day to see all of them, and many other toys besides them, out on the front lawn. My mom, in this picture here with me, had decided to have a yard sale without telling us. And I believe I was in the second or third grade. While we have forgiven her long since, and we still joke about it, I can't underestimate, or excuse me, I can't understate the feeling of vulnerability and helplessness that comes from watching strangers rummaging through your treasured possessions when you're that young. It's horrible. It's a gross feeling. And I still remember coming home and seeing them out of the bus window, running past all of that into my room and sobbing on my bed for quite a while. I think it's important to understand then that my memories that I associate and that I experienced as a child with Masters of the Universe came to a pretty abrupt and unexpected halt. We did still occasionally watch the cartoon, but we never bought any more of the toys, and we didn't have any of them to play with. So it was a pretty unexpected stop. That's the first thing to share. The second thing is a little more recent and a little messier. My wife and I joined a church community while we were in college back in like 2003. We were married there, we have raised our children there, we grew to love many of the folks that we regularly studied with and dined with and prayed with and wept with and just hung out with, just did normal friends things with. During the summer of 2019, we raised some concerns with the leadership about a new policy, a new church policy, and our meetings did not go well. In the end, we left feeling very confused and hurt, and with rare exception, we were sort of unofficially shunned by the community, very unofficially, and I honestly think that some of them don't really know at all what happened, but just felt like it wasn't their place to reach out and ask. And we're still processing all of that. And even now, just starting to reach back out to folks here and there and try to repair those bridges, so to speak. So that was in 2019, and that was a process. We tried again with a different church in the meantime, about a year after that. And again, over the course of a few months in 2020 and 2021, we raised some concerns and some questions with the leadership, and met with some pretty, I'm going to say pretty strong resistance. I don't know that it was intentionally as harsh. I think we were probably still pretty sensitive. But either way, we left that community. We left that feeling the familiar confusion and the hurt once more. There were no knockdown, drag out fights. Nobody was screaming. Nobody got physically injured or anything like that in either of these exchanges or either of these experiences. But it was really just us explaining ourselves and trying to have some feedback and just not feeling heard. And there was a lot of we felt on our end anyway that there was just a lot left unaddressed. And so we still kind of carry that. So, with that being said, I asked why in the last video, if you remember. If you haven't watched that, I'll link it in the comments. I asked why in this scene nobody chased Tila from the throne room. Friends, I was Tila. We were Tila. I know what it means to have my world turned upside down at the discovery that people who I thought were one way are in fact quite different. And I know some of you know that feeling as well. To feel the grief and the anger and the pain and the loss, that cuts really deep. Having walked away from communities ostensibly built from a place of love, I wanted very much to be chased myself. A lot of what I would have changed in Revelation Part 1 was, and I can see that now, my kind of like my own attempt at reconciliation or a kind of like peace. I wanted Tila's story to turn out better than my own. And this is probably why I waited so long to watch the second part, because it felt like once I watched it, I had already taken that leap, and I didn't want to be disappointed. Some might push back and say that this is just a cartoon and that I'm taking it too seriously. Perhaps. With apologies, though, if you write the deaths of several beloved characters and you base the protagonist's arc in betrayal and rejection, and you flirt with more than one toxic relationship throughout just the first half of your series, you're kind of setting the bar high for yourself. It's not too much that you be asked to deliver. That may not be fair. Certainly not everyone who watches the show is going to feel as intense as I do, or as I did. And it definitely took me a while even to be able to understand and articulate my own visceral reaction, really. So like in the last video, I'm not setting out to make another ranty complaint on the internet. The world has enough of that as it is, certainly regarding this topic. Instead, I'm going to try to walk through some ideas that I personally would have liked to have seen play out. It'll look different this time because we're not looking forward in anticipation like we were with the first half, but we're kind of looking back at what we got and trying to rework it a little bit. And again, approaching this in good faith that the whole goal all along was to tell a great story. I still believe that there are some really great threads in here. I just want to try weaving them a little differently, or a lot differently, as the case may be. So like last time, we'll start with the positives. The intro sequence, amazing, loved it. The music is really, really good and does a really good job of, like everybody's kind of got a theme, like that you can tell the different themes and you can tell when the music picks up how that scene's going to go. The tone is set really well with it. I thought the background visuals, like I said last time, and even just the overall visuals, it's near the end mostly that you notice it, but on a second watching, you notice where they start to hint at it and foreshadow a little bit with like some, I'm going to call it anime style animation. That's maybe not exactly the correct way to categorize it. But putting like blur lines or, like mushing the characters a little bit, making them flow a little bit more dynamically. That was really, really good. I really enjoyed those parts. And then I know you can't read, it's in all caps, but the final part, the very final beat, the very final moments of part 2 with the music. Okay, you know what I'm talking about if you've seen it. That was amazing, and I loved that so much, so much. And if you watched the first video, you know that was like already something that I was vibing with. So that was really, really powerful to end on, I felt. Okay, just to kind of recap where we were last time, and again, understanding we're kind of going in a different direction, sort of. At the end of the first part, I wanted us to kind of be in a situation like this. We want Skeletor fighting Triclops and the Motherboard Cult, while our heroes are sort of caught in the middle and needing to address that whole situation. And they've got Tila as their leader among equals, right? Kind of a leader among equals. We will probably open with a merman encounter because I don't want to throw that away. But he's a good lesser villain to kind of like start off a confrontation. It's a neat callback to his sort of not so veiled threat to Lynn in the first part, and it gives us an opportunity to see what the new team has been up against lately. So having said that, maybe we pick up at the end of that confrontation or right in the middle of the last part of it, and all of this is happening sort of a few months on. We sort of advance, like they did sort of between episode 1 and episode 2, kind of advance a few months. Doesn't have to be years necessarily, but a few months to have transpired. But so we have this mini merman encounter, but what we really want to shift focus to right away is the Triclops and Motherboard cult, and Skeletor, because we're setting up a theme here that we kind of flirted with last time. Magic versus machines, right? That tension. Skeletor becomes Jafar, right? And he's fighting the Triclops cult. That's kind of the main backdrop that we're going to have on Eternia, and our team is working out of the palace. So we're not working out of Grayskull anymore, we're working out of the palace. Sorceress left Grayskull. She left Grayskull. She doesn't need to die. She can just kind of transport everyone away, and that's kind of like the last use of her magic, excuse me. But she kind of goes along with them, so that she's actually depowered now. Our first part was we had the motto, "We have the power," right? Remember that? And we can still use that, but it's as much about technology and like mech-like transformations and armor as much as magic. Everybody gets cool new outfits because that's probably one of the best things about a new franchise reboot is you get to see the new costumes. And that will show Duncan and Andra's tinkering with mechanical stuff, as well as the sort of magic that's going on from Orko and Lynn, who are still on the team. Maybe the power that they need, like to power some of these suits or something like that, is like mystical crystals or magical batteries of some kind, if we want to go detailed, but I don't think we need to. Either way, the point is we've got a tension set up between magic and machine, between Skeletor and Motherboard cult, and we've also got some tension in the team between technology and magic as well. And the heroes are kind of a synthesis of that. So that's kind of the first one. But there's another one that I want to weave in as well, and it fits with what we explored in the first part, which was that idea of healing or recovering or reconciling from past trauma, especially centered around hypocrisy or lies, that duplicity, right? We have Sorceress on the team now alongside Duncan, which is really, really rich. That's really fertile ground for some good storytelling and drama. So let's add some drama. Have Sorceress, okay, be contacted by Motherboard secretly and offered a place in her digital kingdom. It could be Andra that we do this to, or it could even be like Cringer or Randor or Marlena, but I don't think so. I think it's got to be Sorceress. She's having trouble coping with the loss of her powers after having left Grayskull, and she starts to look for a substitute for that, and Motherboard has it. So vast virtual power and a central place in Motherboard's sort of kingdom or rule or domain. We have several main characters that have had to excuse me, let me say it again. We have several main characters that have had to heal through past trauma. So let's actually have a narrative that centers on how that unfolds in real time. And I critically, I think we need to have a conversation between Lynn and Sorceress that echoes the one that she had with Orko in Scareglow's Tralla vision thing. In fact, it would make the most sense that this would be Sorceress instead of anybody else, and we can salvage some plot lines from the original show's trajectory and rework them in here. So, like I said, there's stuff in the second part that we can use, but we really do need to repurpose a lot of it, because I think we can hit beats between characters that use those moments just as powerfully as they were used in part 2, but I think we can use them to tell a little bit more compact or cohesive story. Okay, so let's see, make sure I'm not jumping ahead of myself here. So do you remember this quote where Lynn says, "It's all just so empty. There's no design, so there's no meaning. It's all just pain. Life is nothing but an endless, agonizing free fall into death, devoid of any hope. There's no reason, there's no plan. We are all of us utterly alone. So remember when she says that. That was Lynn after seeing the universe with Skeletor. But we're going to take that line and we're going to give it to Sorceress instead. She's falling into this sort of depression, desperation, and Motherboard is able to exploit that. So these words almost aren't really Sorceress's words. They're what Motherboard is kind of whispering into her ear, sort of a Grima Wormtongue situation. And I think we tie this to Motherboard taking over Castle Grayskull as well, because that's a really personal thing for Sorceress. So there's this kind of twisting, corruption that lies, that kind of goes on on Sorceress's end of things. Outwardly, the team is battling to keep Eternia, or maybe even just Eternos at this point, safe from the ravages of an ongoing war between Jafar Skeletor and Motherboard's cult. Okay, so that's the outside stuff. But inwardly, there's a crisis of having Sorceress coping with her own experiences and powerlessness, and she's doing this privately, as well as the usual tension that would just come from having a party that is comprised of Lynn and Beastman alongside Adam and Teela. So this is not necessarily a play for play. There's a lot of wiggle room in here that you can do other neat moments and other interesting confrontations and encounters, but I think this would be the bones on which I would start to paint that episode or that series, rather than well, let me say it differently. This is where I would start, and then if there were any holes, and I would aim to not have many, but if there were any, I would use those opportunities to have my cameos or to have my B-plot stuff within the team and stuff in such a fashion that it's going to strengthen and reinforce the overall theme. Okay. Remember this too, this quote. It's Lynn. It's a Lynn quote. To give your lives meaning, you strive for an eternal reward in the great beyond beside your heroes. But I've come to free you of the shackles of spirituality. Rise and take your glory. There is nothing to live for, merely chaos, and to chaos will we all return. So that's what Lynn says when she destroys Preternia. But we're going to give that line to Motherboard. Sorceress says her line about all of us being utterly alone at kind of the midpoint, at kind of like the crescendo of our whole part of our series or miniseries. And at that point, Motherboard is gaining an upper hand and is able to attack Eternos and has her epic reveal where she has her giant cybernetic body. So in my mind, I'm thinking like the cult arrives at the doorstep and they have the bird, the big robot bird, and they're demanding surrender of the city, and Randor refuses. And at that point, the idol begins its transformation into Motherboard. And all the turrets and all the troops in the city aren't enough to stop her and her horde of mechanical minions. And a side note there, something that I'm always filtering for in shows like this is collateral damage. I did not appreciate, and I am going to offer a mini complaint here, I did not appreciate how when He-Hulk, or whatever we call He-Man without the sword, was slicing the citizens in half and stuff like that. I know you can kind of say that maybe they were repaired shortly thereafter, but I don't like the idea that you have these people who are supposed to be heroes protecting the innocent and so on, so readily turning around and destroying other beings that were like innocent citizens, right? It just sticks out to me, and I don't know, that's just how I'm wired. So I think we can have a line, especially in this context where we're talking about Motherboard's followers who are themselves probably experiencing a degree of both physical and mental or spiritual trauma. We should have a line about using weaponry that doesn't actually kill them. And Duncan and Andra can shine here. And I'm saying Duncan and Andra because there's definitely a partnership there and a passing of the torch that I really like and I want to respect. Because, like I say, those minions are kind of brainwashed, those citizens, those followers. And maybe that's why, ultimately, Eternos loses the battle or surrenders. Skeletor, during this whole bit, is kind of sidelined, presumably defeated when Motherboard took Castle Grayskull. probably even with some secret inside info about Castle Grayskull given to her from Sorceress. But he shows up at the last minute, though, to help the team, to help our gang evacuate Eternos. Maybe with some of his own minions. He can bring in some of the other folks that we saw when Tila and Andra were kind of going through the basement of Castle Grayskull and some of the others. We can bring them in. So maybe Skeletor shows up and he's got them and helps the team to escape, because one of the really cool concepts and twists that you can do with narratives like this is have Skeletor essentially say, look, if anybody's going to rule this place, if anybody's going to get to defeat you folks, it's going to be me, right? So sort of an enemy of your enemy is your friend kind of happening here. Motherboard has Sorceress well in her sway now, and that's the important part, right? And that's what the next focus is going to be of our story, is rescuing her and then exposing Motherboard as a sham. So there'll be some lovely dialogue between Skeletor and Lynn, of course, and everyone else on the team. This is like some really rich moments for some cool dynamics, social dynamics. But now we are in the throes of our first two major themes, the trauma theme and the magic versus machines theme. And we're kind of sneaking in some subtext here. And I want to give a nod to it without going too far into it, which is something like the past versus progress. We have the power as our motto, and that's been used several times by now, and the emphasis has always been on the we, the heroes, and now we're making it clear that it really kind of, in a subtle way, that it isn't just the heroes who have the power, but indeed the true characters, the true holders of the franchise, so to speak, like Eternians. And no upstart newcomer character, Motherboard, is going to muck up the status quo. Skeletor and the gang are going to work together for this singular purpose, okay? And maybe literally there's a line where one of them just says, probably Skeletor says, when this is over, we're going back to fighting. Like, this is a temporary alliance at best, right? But we can get everyone there. Okay, so there's a part of me that wants to have the team all form together in some sort of like Transformer Voltron construct, but that's just me maybe being over the top. Whatever it ends up looking like ultimately doesn't work. It's unsuccessful. Motherboard is just too powerful. The team lays wounded and scattered. So we're probably... So we've lost Eternos, we've escaped, and I think this is going to be sort of an assault on Grayskull. We've kind of shifted back to Grayskull, which is kind of the Tatooine of the series. But Motherboard is just too powerful. It doesn't work. The team lays wounded and scattered. Their reliance on tech all along had been working just fine, but how does it really help against a literal machine god? Sorceress sees her role in Motherboard's rule as not too dissimilar from her old one, which is a keeper of the secrets and things like that. But now she's like cyborged out, and she has a form of power that she misses and craves, but which is, of course, this form is corrupting her. And Tila sees her mom like this, and I think she's going to lay down her staff and take off her tech armor or weaponry or whatever it was that they just used unsuccessfully. And we're going to repurpose some other dialogue. And she's going to say this to Sorceress. And again, some of the stuff needs to be reworked a little bit, but I want it to be true to the original stuff because the emotional impact or the narrative impact is important. So remember this line. You can save the entire universe, but only if you're stronger than I was. And that means you have to be strong enough to let them go. Originally, that line was about leaving friends for the greater good. And it was also kind of referenced, it kind of references running away to deal with things a little bit on your own. But we're going to make it about reliance on the kind of power and technology that Motherboard is offering. There's no substitute for good friends. And Sorceress has kind of lost sight of that. In order for this to really land, we do need to have played up how much Tila relies on her tech, which is not impossible to do, especially if she starts to elevate, if we give more spotlight to Andra. Maybe it's a prideful B-plot or something like that. It doesn't really matter. Ultimately, we need this moment to land, so we need to make sure that we're focused on the idea that Tila specifically is really appreciative of the tech and using the tech, and so she's realizing that that's futile in her battle against Motherboard, and so this line really lands, because she's now encouraging her mom to give up all of that. Sorceress herself probably sees herself as a mediator between Motherboard and the minions, right? She feels she's necessary in order to keep them from falling completely into corruption. And so she doesn't feel like she can just leave them behind. But she has to. They have to make their own choices, and most importantly, she can't help them if she's not in a better position herself, if she's not in a healthier position herself. She's not really much of a help to them. So, let me make sure we're not losing our slides here. Oh, I missed that slide. That should have been Motherboard. That's okay. But now we're back to some Motherboard minions, right? They do see this. They when Sorceress leaves or starts to doubt, the followers of Motherboard also kind of see that, and their faith is shaken. Turns out that Motherboard was just using Sorceress as a way to control the power, centered on Grayskull, of course, and to convince more people to join her cult and increase her power, increase her rule. Once Sorceress starts to doubt, the followers do as well, but it's not enough to save the day just yet. To that end, I think this exchange between Tila and Lynn from the original show can also mostly be preserved and spoken during a final confrontation with Motherboard inside the castle. Sorceress helped Motherboard. She was used by Motherboard to synthesize and steal all the power for her own techno purposes. And she's just beginning to see that, Sorceress is. Well, there's one person on the team who knows what it's like to be used, right? And to serve a cruel master, and to suffer under that sort of leadership. Lynn. It could be, I could see in a version we use Duncan or Tila because of their relationship, but I think Lynn makes the best candidate here. Imagine the team is all caught up battling minions and everything outside and injured and whatnot. Motherboard doesn't need the Sorceress anymore. She's got Castle Grayskull, and she's just in that full Jafar mode. Lynn makes her way through the fray to plead with Sorceress in a callback to that earlier conversation that they had. So remember, we wanted to have a conversation that kind of echoed Orko and Lynn, their exchange in the Tralla vision kind of thing. So now we're going to give the payoff for that. So Sorceress says, one man takes the castle, another tries to steal it. That's over now. The end will be a mercy for everyone. No more fighting. No more little girls growing up to make the same mistakes I did. No more pain. So this is the depression. This is the desperation. This is the loss. This is the pain. This is the trauma speaking, right? And Lynn says to her, you're right. The universe, it's chaos and hurt and death, but it is everything else too. It's beauty, it's love, it's life. The universe, it's... And then Sorceress says, it's magic. And Lynn says, we have the power. Rallying through quick conversation, so let that be land, but then picking up outside and around the castle, rallying through some quick conversation, and maybe even an episode break. Maybe this is a really powerful piece. We probably want to land, like end an episode beat on that. But then we pick up outside, probably for the final confrontation, final episode, however you want to phrase it. And then all of the old crew, Skeletor, Triclops, Randor, Marlena, Adam, Tila, Lynn, Sorceress, Mossman, everybody, is able to kind of tap into this power for one final blast. Taking Sorceress away from Motherboard kind of allows a bit of a short circuit to the magic, and so everyone is able to kind of get together, form together, and whether it's magical power or technological power or morale boosting power, whatever, everybody is able to get together for this final blast, this final attack that defeats Motherboard. And of course, maybe she's blown into pieces and scattered everywhere, and we have a post-credit scene that picks up or whatever. What's important is everybody defeats her for the most part. But in that aftermath, so I imagine like a blinding flash. In the aftermath, Skeletor has vanished with his own hench people. And Tila is left to lead the team in a more traditional dynamic that we're all used to. Only the world has changed. And so are the people in it. We had a trauma arc, beginning end, machine versus magic, beginning and end, and then some betrayal and distrust kind of present with Sorceress. But we have ultimately gone through that and returned to a more or less classic balance of power across the setting. Okay. I know, it can't be denied that Tila was set up to be the sorceress, even in the older shows. So I suppose that we could let her be sorceress, the new sorceress now, and have a great scene between her and Andra about putting aside personal desires for the sake of the greater good, and then Andra takes her place as man-at-arms, and Duncan and the old sorceress retire somewhere to a cabin out in the wilderness. Adam becomes team leader once again, and so on. If we're gaining Lynn and Beastman onto the team, then I think we need to have lost some folks, but I'm not really sure who that would be. So maybe there was like a small moment where someone who was, normally on the good guy's side kind of agreed with some of Skeletor's thinking. I hate to think it would be Orko, but who knows? I can see that. I can see that playing out like this. Someone who thought that like diplomacy and friendship was not as important as winning. I think that would give some service to some of the fans who have been waiting for this moment for a really long time. Personally, I would rather have Tila stay as the leader of the group and Lynn become the sorceress. She has a good understanding of magic. She has an appreciation for what it means to be hoodwinked by evil. And this really does pivot on her saying to the sorceress, we have the power. It's a passing of the torch. Lynn has a deep bond with Beastman, and he could guard the castle, while Duncan and Old Sorceress retire. And I think that could be really neat. Beastman could even kind of be the champion, but meh. Maybe Duncan and the Old Sorceress in their retirement, maybe they bring along the Orlax, which I think could just be really a fun moment. I still maintain, I have this underlined in my notes, I still maintain that all of the signaling in the first part was for Tila to become the champion, and that shoehorning her into becoming shoehorning her into becoming the sorceress just so she could completely redefine what the sorceress means is a little odd. I get it, I understand, I'm with you, roger that. But I don't think that's what the story was really pointing to. And I think I said that last time. Bringing us back, I think 5 episodes is sufficient time to explore all of this, but we would need to, of course, cut out so much of the superfluous cameos and plot threads that kind of go nowhere. This isn't a complaint video, so I'm not going to do all of that, but in my opinion, there were several ideas that were introduced and then kind of dropped without any reason. I want to reiterate that I did enjoy the series overall. Like I said before, I wouldn't be making these videos if I didn't. I heartily disagree that it was a classic He-Man story, though. And I think even He-Man does, because he literally tells Skeletor, this isn't about them. But I also don't think that's a bad thing, that it's not a He-Man story. It was a Teal story, and it's a Lynn story. And I think trying to make it appear to be something else really just ends up hurting the whole effort. Be honest. Be proud of what you're doing, and tell it. No problems there, no judgment. So those are my thoughts. My first video was kind of loaded with some cautious optimism, and this one was more about undoing what I thought wasn't working and trying to stay true to some of the themes and threads that were going on, but also trying to have a fulfillment of the things that I had thought were important in the first half, mixed with a healthy dose of just kind of like alternate universe ideas. When someone sets out to tell a mature story, it can mean violence, it can mean gore, and it can mean swearing and suggestive language and suggestive content, and Revelation does have some of all of that, but it can also mean thematic elements that don't fit so easily into the traditional cartoon mold. Not all of our problems can be solved in 22 minutes. But that doesn't mean that they can't still eventually be solved, or at least learned from. And here's my kicker. The titular revelation of this series should be that even as we grow and change and leave the past behind, which we must do, it can still play a valuable role in our lives moving forward. I'll leave you with that. Thanks so much for watching. I will catch you next time. Excelsior.